Cool. All right, welcome everybody to the PreVeteran 2.0 Transition Podcast, and we're going to address some of the employment gaps you have leaving the military today. I'm here with Jason, who's going to kick us off.
How's it going, everybody? Aaron, thanks for kind of putting this together. I'm super excited about or discussing this topic with you. The employment gaps you have leaving the military. A lot of people are completely unaware of these, so let's go ahead and get started on the short video. So I'd like to kick this off talking about something that is near and dear to pre-veterans' heart, is that we're very interested in your thinking and we're very interested in your decision-making. Here's why. Thoughts ultimately lead to outcomes, and this is the graphic that you're looking at on the screen right now. So your thoughts will drive your behaviors will drive your decision-making, and then obviously your decision-making will dictate your outcomes.
Yeah, and I don't think that's obvious to a lot of people, and it actually requires you to sit down and think about that process for a minute to realize if that's true or not. And I think as you really consider it, we know it's true from cognitive neuroscience and people simply evaluating how your brain processes information. But I think it takes a second to really think on it and realize that this is how you come to the decisions you make and ultimately get the outcomes that you get, because those are based off those decisions that you're making. And I think this simple slide goes at a very deep level, and we just want to kind of cover the surface level of this concept, because it's super important when it comes to, well, things like military transition and going through the decision-making process and the many decisions that you'll be making as you navigate that transition space.
Absolutely. And the thing I just want to, I think you really touched on a really important point here, which is the simplicity. We want to give you tools to make things very simple for you to understand. So the big takeaway from this slide is your thoughts do lead to your outcomes, because it speaks to the decision-making. So let's move over to this, and this is what we call the ignorant hubris. So the ignorant hubris is really kind of the standpoint that you take to transition, or rather the mindset that you take into transition. So when I developed this model years ago, it really spoke to me, because in a very scientific way, when we're talking about your thoughts lead to outcomes, we really need to then talk about how your thoughts derive. So you could see, based on the ignorant hubris, today we're going to focus on the left side, which is the ignorance piece. And just to go in a little bit more detail, the ignorance is established because you, as a military member or military spouse, do not have any associated long-term memories that relate to private sector employment. So guess what? There's no long-term memory for your brain to recall, to use, to think about your private sector employment once you leave the military.
Absolutely. And, we use that word ignorance in a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek way, because, both of us have experienced our own military transition, and we know that there are things that we experienced where we didn't know what we didn't know. And it's no slight against the individual, because you simply haven't been trained to understand the space that you're stepping into. You know what I mean? So when we talk about gaps, we're not talking about a failing on your part necessarily. This is just something that you haven't experienced before, and we use the language of ignorance to just convey that, hey, you don't know what you don't know, and you haven't experienced this before, so you need training in order to address that, and you need the proper training. This isn't just going off and getting your PNP or going off and doing some random certification. This is really understanding the military transition space, understanding how your brain is operating and how that's going to affect your decision-making process, so that you can start having a handle on that process. You can start interrogating those thoughts and figure out if they're productive or unproductive. Because when you're making decisions in a space where you have no long-term memories, you have to be very cautious with what kind of decisions you're making, right? Because you don't have the experience level to really do that. And I think you could give a number of examples to really drive that point home, but it's just super important to recognize that, hey, there's going to be some stuff you simply don't know, and it's not a slight against you. It's just simply that you haven't done it before, you haven't experienced it before, and so you need some training. And that's all we're saying with this.
That's exactly right. The way I like to kind of characterize it, as we've been doing this for a while now, is we want to give you tools so you're self-aware. And if you're self-aware, then you're able to kind of know when these thoughts enter your mind, and then you're able, to your point, to be able to kind of override those and then be head on to a path to a much more successful thinking evolution, decision-making evolution, which will align you to the private sector. So with that, let's go ahead and go to this slide. I think this is our last slide, but we're going to talk specifically about some of the gaps you're going to have that do relate to post-military employment. So here's our gap graphic, and let's talk about the first one. So because you haven't done it before and there's no long-term memory to recall from, one of the things we know that you're going to have is we know that you are not going to understand the differences, and they are profound, between the military and the private sector.
That's right. And, you know, we may think that whatever job we had, I know a lot of guys coming out of the Pentagon that end up working with some industry partners in that role, they actually don't think this is true. They think that their role in the military was one for one and totally aligned with the private sector. And I'm not attacking you, Jason, because I know this was your mindset coming out of the Pentagon as well, right? But I know you also, you know, during your 10 years at Collins, that you experienced a lot of other folks who were in a similar station and role at the Pentagon. And again, they entered into the company thinking they fully understood the industry and the company because they had worked with a few individuals in that industry. But it just wasn't true. And as you can attest, it took a long time to get, you know, quote unquote, up to speed on your job role that you were actually in. So I think we just got to recognize that this is a reality, whether or not you want to accept it and nod your head. It is a reality, and you want to recognize that sooner rather than later, because if you stubbornly kind of proceed and think that this isn't a reality, then it ends up hitting you in the face in your first job, and you've really already shot yourself in the foot at that point, because you have an extreme uphill battle to overcome and learn what all those differences are. When in reality, we can take you right now and give you that information, and we can start exploring what those differences are, wrapping our minds around that, and then we'd be very comfortable in that new environment as we navigate it.
100% correct. So the real big takeaway from here is that the military and the private sector environments are drastically different, which drive the next two bullets a lot. So the next two bullets are, because the environments are so different, that is going to influence how the company is organized, and then how the company makes money through programs. So again, it's really an environmental. So if you kind of liken it to your life, when you're in the military environment, things are done a certain way. What you don't realize is that the private sector environment, which is driven by competition, it's driven by existence, and it's driven by the need to make money, it is a completely different environment that you're unfamiliar with. And guess what? That's going to impact how companies are organized and how they make money. So these are really some of the massive differences we talk about between those. And I know this is a short video, but this is really what we specialize in when we're talking about doing our employment prep course, which we hold 3 times a year, because being able to understand these differences and then overcome them is a really important part of your journey that you must do if you want to be successful post-military.
Absolutely. And this, you know, simple little phrase we have up here about how companies are organized, that's actually a very profound thing, because you don't understand the level of specificity a company is requiring necessarily right away. And what we get individuals to do out of our employment prep course is to identify down to the industry, company role, and level what they actually want to do next. And that's super important, because that's how companies organize. They do it down to that level of specificity. And that's driven off their need to fulfill certain requirements in the company in order to continue earning revenue and making money and continuing to exist. And again, to drive home the fact that there are differences, you may have managed a budget in the military, but you never managed a profit and loss, because you're never getting profits as a military entity. You're simply given a budget, you spend the budget. And so you may have managed a large budget or a large number of assets, but you actually never managed a profit and loss. You never had to project earnings. So you actually don't fully understand how companies make money. And we try to get you to begin understanding that process so that you can align to the private sector, which is super important as you transition out of the military.
Absolutely. And you hit on it really nicely there just a moment ago. But when you talk about how companies are organized, this is our final bullet. Guess what? As Aaron was saying just a moment ago, when you're looking for roles out there in the private sector, they're looking for very credentialed specialists to hire into that because of that hyper competitive environment we told you that's very different than the military. They need those roles to do very specific tasks. They are not looking for a generalist. And I think we covered that in a video previously. But you need to understand how those roles aid the profit-making enterprise, because what Aaron just said, companies have to make money before they spend it, which is a profound difference between that and the military. So, hey, Aaron, I think we're going to try to keep this short, but I would like to, again, impress upon the listener that we are doing these videos routinely now on a weekly basis. They are just kind of a mini insight into how we do things very differently than the rest of the folks out there that simply just provide resources. We do not do that. We are very invested in getting you to change the way you think and then begin to transform yourself so that you're more marketable, so that you have the tools that you need to really plug into the private sector, make a better living, earn a better wage, have a healthier, wealthier, and more productive transition that doesn't just impact you, but it impacts your family and it impacts the entire veteran population at large.
Absolutely. And we just spoke to one of our students yesterday who just drove home the point that this stuff works and this learning works because he's negotiating his first job offer. And he said, I'm glad I started a year out because I felt like I needed at least that much time. I mean, he was hustling that entire last year and he just made it, he's on terminal leave now and just finally getting those job offers and figuring it out. So you need to give yourself at least a year before you transition. And that's what we advocate. So come visit our website, PreVeteran.com. We also have a foundation, PreVeteranFoundation.org. Please check those resources out, and we would love to see you there and answer any questions.
All right, Aaron, great chatting with you. And we'll have all those things in the comments below. But we hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to leave a comment, do so. And we'll see you next week when we have our next video.
We'll see you there.